Good evening. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I know it's hard to get people to come out in nice weather, even more than terrible weather. So it's really wonderful to see so many people here tonight. To get right to it, I'm going to talk about a whole bunch of different things tonight. But before we go down the things that I've prepared, I'd really like to ask why everybody came out tonight. Because I can talk to you for hours and hours and hours about toddler discipline and how to manage everyday behavior problems, but I can kind of tailor this as we go. And so if I know what you want to get out of this, it's going to be much easier for me to give you what you want. So why are you here? What would you like to know tonight?
Picking battles.
Okay, so a few housekeeping things of my own. Sometimes there's feedback from the people tuning in on the internet that they have a hard time hearing the floor mics, and so I might end up sounding like I'm saying everything that you say again. That's for the people on the internet. So you said choosing your battles.
Yes.
What do you mean by choosing your battles?
Just helping to know what.
There are some things that probably just aren't worth trying to discipline over. If you try to over-discipline, she won't want to do anything at all.
Okay.
Or she won't listen to anything that we tell her.
Okay, so choosing battles, what to discipline, what not to discipline, and you not wanting to over-discipline. Okay? Other things?
I'd like to know the appropriate or effective discipline for each situation.
Okay. That might take a couple years, but we'll give you a foundation. Okay. What to do in specific situations, I'm hearing.
Yes.
Okay. Other things?
I think one is, you always want to reinforce the positive, so hopefully you don't have to address the negative, but at what point do you go from that positive to stop it?
Okay. So reinforcing the positive versus maybe punishing or addressing the negative? Okay. Other things?
How to discipline outside of the home?
How to discipline outside the home. Okay. So I'm imagining a situation at Walmart where horrible meltdown tantrums because they can't have candy or toys or something like that.
Well, it ain't because they can't have, it's more of pushing the cart. I want to walk. It's not having things, it's wanting to run around and act like crazy people.
Okay. So how to discipline outside the home and just general craziness.
Yeah. Yeah, just how to subdue them and keep them in line a little better.
Okay.
One discipline that you've been using was working and then it stops.
Okay, so when things you've tried in the past have worked, but then they kind of lose their effect. Okay. Other things you'd like to take home tonight?
Any strategies to use when the child becomes physical?
Okay. Strategies to use when the child becomes physical. One of the things I'll start plugging right now is the talk I'm going to give tonight is an overview of general strategies for toddler discipline. When it comes to managing physical things, you might want to come to the next parenting you I'm doing on timeout, which is much more kind of specific in terms of how to use that strategy and what behaviors to use that strategy to manage. But we'll talk about some of those tonight too. Other things you'd like to hear about? This is a great list. Yes?
Mine is age-specific discipline, like from a 1-year-old to a 2-year-old to a 3-year-old.
Okay, so age-specific discipline. Okay. All right, this is a great list. And I'm probably going to talk about all of these things in general kinds of ways. And if by the time I'm done with the talk, we'll have a few minutes at the end to get more specific. And so if you feel like your questions aren't answered or your concerns aren't addressed, we can come back and talk more specifically about it. Okay? So with that being said, some of the things I'm going to talk about today are general ways to think about how kids are learning and then how to affect that learning process. And so kind of how to talk about where kids pick up new behaviors, how to discourage problematic or old behaviors. So a lot of times this is where parents' expectations start before the child actually arrives. So you see lots of happy faces, kids want to learn, they want to read, very affectionate, very clean, very happy, all of those kinds of things. However, the reality tends to be very different from that. And even this is kind of soft pedaling what actually happens. Be aggressive, make huge messes all over the place, and sometimes it's not just contained to themselves in terms of where the mess goes, and then lots of just upset behavior, crying, screaming, yelling, tantrums, all those kinds of things. And so what we're going to talk about tonight is more along the lines of what the reality of the situation tends to be, rather than those expectations. So with that, we'll talk a little bit, generally speaking, about discipline. And this came up in the questions we talked about before we even started, about what to reinforce and what to discourage. And it's important to think about as you go into this kind of parenting endeavor that what you do isn't inherently punishing or reinforcing just by the very act. So some kids might get really, really excited about candy or hugs, and other kids might get really, really excited about getting away from people. And so thinking about sending a child to their room, they might escape or avoid whatever you were trying to get them to do. And so it ends up actually encouraging that behavior more often. A classic example of this is when you take a child to the store and they scream and whine and scream and whine and scream and whine until you buy them that one thing. What they learn is, when I scream and whine, I get what I want. And a lot of times, all the behaviors that we see out of kids, all those behaviors are functional. They serve a purpose to get the child what they want in that particular situation. There are times where it might be sort of dysregulation or agitation, but most of the time, the way kids handle that agitation or dysregulation is functional. And so if I yell and scream, if I hit mom, or I hit dad, or I throw something at mom, I throw something at dad, it in one way or another gets me what I want. This can happen. I've done lots of observations in daycares. This happens all the time with biting at daycare. It's an incredibly functional behavior. So a child sees a toy they want, another child is holding that toy, I bite that child, I get that toy. And even if I don't get that toy, I've got a daycare worker coming over and holding me and soothing me and talking to me about how I shouldn't be biting. That ultimately is not going to reduce the behavior. And so when we're thinking about how we handle these situations, and also when we're talking about some strategies that worked in the past and don't anymore, thinking about why they worked in the past. What was it about that consequence that was effective for the child, and why, thinking about what about that worked and why it's not working anymore. So what was that achieving and what it's not achieving now. Lots of parents come to me in my office with sort of a case of the supposed to's. My child is supposed to do this. My child is supposed to do that. My child's supposed to listen. My child's supposed to want to please me. All of these kinds of things. And that, when we're talking about what to punish and what to reinforce, a lot of parents get stuck with, I shouldn't praise this. I shouldn't give lots of reinforcement for something the child's supposed to do anyway. At this age, there are no supposed to's, other than a slide we'll talk about later, and that's the peeing and the pooping and the eating and that kind of thing. But other than that, there's not a whole lot of supposed to's. Everything else they've got to learn, and one of the best ways to teach them is through the consequences that we give them. So I'm not going to talk a whole lot about kind of behaviorism, but this is something really important to keep in mind. And just one thing to walk out of here with in terms of a scientific principle, and that's the matching law, which is the rate of behavior is directly proportional to the rate at which it's reinforced. And so I get what I want every time I do this behavior. I'm going to do this behavior all the time. If I get reinforced for this behavior every now and then I'm only going to do this behavior every now and then. And that's really important to think about when it comes to encouraging positive behaviors. If I follow directions and mom and dad notice 1 in 10 times, I'm going to listen to mom and dad the first time they tell me 1 in 10 times. If I'm told to clean my room and something really wonderful happens after I clean my room, then I'm going to clean my room because I expect that to happen every single time. And so thinking about these kind of rates of good things that the kids get for doing what they are being encouraged to do or what you'd like them to do is really, really important. And so when it comes to a question of reinforcement, I never discourage it. Like, there's never a time where I talk to parents and say, you know, you're really giving too much positive reinforcement. You're really giving too much praise. You're giving too many prizes. What we'll talk about later is those prizes or those rewards have to be contingent, that the child cleans their room or the child follows directions or the child, you know, produces something when they're sitting on the toilet. But it is still reinforcement as much as possible. The other thing that's really important to think about is realistic expectations. So this whole process of parenting and going through toddlerhood, it takes a long time. And a lot of these behaviors are really sophisticated. Things like following directions is really, really sophisticated. And if you look at adults, sometimes people don't get it, even by the time they're adults following directions. And so thinking about how kids develop these sort of non-compliant behaviors and they're not doing what they're supposed to do, and I tell them and I tell them and I tell them, and I feel like I'm beating my head against the wall, I feel like it used to work and it's not working anymore, it takes a lot of time. And what we look for, especially at this age, is much more along the lines of trends rather than perfection. So we want to see them listening to me the first time I tell them 60%, 70% of the time. Maybe we get down when we're out in public, they're only acting crazy once a week. And we go and run errands a couple times a week, and so we've really made some progress there, that we're seeing some positive direction in that trend. And before we start talking about some of the specifics in terms of behavior management, it's really important to keep in mind the difference between some of these kind of physiological goals versus some social goals. When it comes to physiological goals, there are a lot of issues related to hard wiring that we got to consider in this process. So when it comes to peeing and pooping and going to bed at night and eating a variety of healthy foods, definitely goals that parents have. But some of this is going to come online based on a biological schedule more so than a daycare schedule or a preschool schedule, something like that. Whereas in this other column, we're talking much more about social goals. And these social goals are determined by lots of different factors and as such take in some ways a lot more work. Getting a child, we talked about kind of how following directions is a really kind of complicated skill that kids need a lot of practice with. You know, keeping your hands to yourself. We talked about in daycares how biting is really functional. Biting works really, really well. Hitting works really, really well. And so teaching kids not to do that and find more pro-social, but maybe less available ways to meet their needs can be really complicated. And accepting decisions, being able to hear no and think to myself, oh, I can't have this right now, but maybe mom or dad will give it to me later. Or maybe if I do what mom and dad say, then I can get this thing that I want so badly. That takes a lot of time and a lot of experience of hearing no and having various consequences associated with what I do after I hear no. So, and staying calm. That's not natural for a whole lot of different people. So, with that foundation laid, we can talk a little bit about how people learn. The first way I always like to talk about, the way that kind of comes online really, really clearly, is modeling. So kids learn by what they see. This is why you want to be careful about how much exposure kids get to things like professional wrestling at a young age, when they can't tell the difference between fantasy and reality, and you can't be hit with a ladder or a chair and survive very easily, or even sort of action figures or more violent cartoons that kids are going to do what they see. And we see this all the time. My wife and I have a 13-month-old at home, and I'm sitting at my laptop, and 13-month-old's in her high chair. I'm typing, and she's typing on her high chair. And I'm sure you see this around, that your toddlers do the same thing, that it doesn't, they're doing it sheerly for the fact that you're doing it. And this can be true with teaching all kinds of behaviors, whether that's sharing, taking turns, listening, using the toilet when it's time to start toilet training, having the opportunity to see parents use the toilet and be able to see that behavior model can be really effective. It also works in the other direction in terms of having anger outbursts, or yelling and cursing, those kinds of things. So, in terms of how kids learn, modeling is the first one. The second one I want to talk about is direct instruction. This is 2 + 2 is 4. This is how you tie your shoes. This is how you take your diaper off when you're not supposed to, or I don't want you to. So seeing these and sort of giving the child instructions as you go to figure out how to do these different kinds of tasks or behaviors. When it comes to these kinds of things, I always recommend to take it slow and easy. It's great for things like using the bathroom, or manners, or helping, or cleaning up your room. This is, how you pick your toys up. This is how you sort your toys, those sorts of things. Fundamentally, it's important to keep in mind that your kids want to please you. And they want to see you happy, and they want to work for your attention or praise or, again, positive reinforcement. They get frustrated and disappointed when they can't do that. And we have to be very conscious of the attention that we give to kids, especially at this age. So it's really important to focus on effort more so than on success or performance. And in this process, you got to be ready for really, really, really spectacular messes that they're not going to be able to get at, and they're going to make a mess out of things before they're actually able to accomplish whatever you're trying to teach them to do. And the third, and likely what most folks came to hear about tonight, the third way kids learn are consequences. And consequences are effective not only to increase certain behaviors and discourage other behaviors, but also to instill motivation. So you can think about behavior in lots of different ways, or deficits in lots of different ways. Some deficits are what we'd call skill deficits. Those are things that the child can't do. So any of y'all's toddlers, we put a calculus book in front of them, they probably can't do it. However, so that would be a skill deficit. A performance deficit is, I know how to do it, but I won't do it. I know how to hold your hand in the store. I know how to get in the cart in the store, but I don't want to. That's not as much fun, so I'm going to run around like crazy. When it comes to consequences, it's not as simple and clear-cut as just rewards and punishment. As we talked about earlier, the more important question is what I'm doing encouraging their behavior or discouraging their behavior? So I keep doing the same thing over and over again, and they don't respond to it. We got to figure out what it is about this that's not working anymore. Or I keep trying to get them to stay calm in the store, and they just won't stay calm in the store. There are lots of ways to encourage positive behavior. Those include things like physical affection, tangible rewards. So you stay close to me in the store, you hold my hand, you stay in the cart, then when we get to the end, you can pick out something, pick out candy to take home, something like that. Praise is also really, really important. And virtually anything that you say to your child works as attention in terms of getting them engagement or kind of a positive experience with you. But ways to make praise more effective include being as specific as possible. You did a great job holding my hand. You did a great job staying calm in the store. You did a great job accepting no. Those kinds of things. Ways to discourage behavior, at least in the way I work with a lot of parents, is the fundamental key is to be boring and robotic, more or less. That the most wonderful thing that your child has in your life is you, and when you're giving a consequence, you want that to be as boring as possible, where you take yourself out of it in every possible way. So ignoring certain behaviors, timeout, taking away privileges, and then if it's difficulties with compliance, even guiding the child to do whatever you've instructed them to do so they learn that there's no way out of this. If mom and dad say you have to pick up your toys, then we're going over there and we're picking up and putting the toys away. So baseline, that's how children learn. Direct instruction, modeling, and then through these consequences. Now there are also ways to make consequences more effective. Kids this age have a very, very short attention span. And when it comes down to it, an immediate reinforcement is effective with everyone. And so the more quickly that you can apply the consequence, the better off kids are going to be. And so addressing the behavior, both either with giving them the good stuff or giving them things that they don't like or taking away things that they like. So however you're managing the behavior, making sure that consequence comes as immediately as possible, which can be a real challenge when you're out shopping or when you're out and about, but we can talk about ways to modify this for those situations. So, and this works both ways. So you want to encourage the behavior, great job, good work, holding hands in the store, following directions, whatever that is. Discouraging, you hit your sister, please go to timeout. Over and done with, it happens right away. As much as possible, you want to limit threats and limit warnings and limit explanations, because especially at this age, any kind of really wordy interaction with the child undermines whatever you're trying to get done and is not really an effective consequence to discourage behavior. Because yes, they may end up in timeout, yes, they may end up losing a favorite toy, but there's a whole lot of rich attention that happens on the way to losing that toy or to going to timeout. Plus, it introduces a lot of uncertainty to kids if you give lots of chances or if you give lots of explanations. If I know that I have a consequence coming as soon as I do this thing or that thing, I know I can't get away with it. But if I know I get this time maybe 2 or 3 chances, next time 4 or 5 chances, and it's not until I hear that particular tone or volume in mom and dad's voice, then I can keep getting away with something until I hear that tone or that volume. And no parent wants to have to get that loud or have to use that tone. Your commands and your consequences should be as boring as anything. As, you know, as I'm talking right now, you shouldn't have to raise your voice. You shouldn't have to be stirring your tone. Warnings aren't a consequence. And so giving warnings or second chances really only lets the child know, I can get away with this at least once. And so the next time I do this, I know I get at least a warning before the consequence happens. And so we're talking about lots of parents of toddlers right now. The sooner the child learns that mom and dad mean business the very first time, the better off y'all are going to be. Also, as I'm going through all these things, I know a lot of folks have come in a little bit later. We started talking about kind of what brought y'all here, but as I'm going through any of this, questions come up or you hear what I'm saying and think to yourself, I've tried this, it didn't work, what am I doing wrong or what should I do differently? Just stop me and let me know, okay? Everybody good so far? Any questions about anything I brought up? Okay. Oh, sorry.
That's all right. I was going to ask. And you're probably going to go over it, but an immediate good reinforcement, what would be an appropriate one? Like I know you talked about like candy at the end of the store, but if he cleans his room, would a good immediate thing be like a sticker, or I mean, what suggestions I guess could you give for what an immediate reward would be?
Mm-hmm. It depends on a lot of factors. It depends on his age or his or her age. It depends on kind of the history you've had in getting that task done. When it comes to the age range of the kids that we're talking about, clean your room is a monumental task. So it might be pick up the Legos or pick up the clothes. And you want to break big things down as much as possible into small things, and all the way along you can be given all kinds of verbal praise. you know, thank you so much for putting that shirt away. You're such a good helper. Now I need you to put the Legos away. Oh, you did a great job. You did that so fast. Anything that you want to see more of, you want to make sure you label it and praise it. And so your child has dawdles a lot. Anytime you see them moving quickly or efficiently, you want to lay in and give that a lot of attention. So great job moving quick through putting the Legos away. Now I need you to do this. Now I need you to do that. So along the way, lots of verbal praise can be really helpful. Another really easy way to give that reinforcement immediately and sort of repeatedly is physical affection. So lots of high fives, lots of pats on the back. At the end of the store, you can talk about some kind of tangible reward. I mean, in a perfect world, I mean, you could start with a bag of M&Ms and you're giving an M&M the whole way through, but that's not the kind of time that most people have, and you're in the store because you need to do other things. You're not there to teach them how to be in the store, and so that's kind of a secondary task. But if you're working on cleaning the room, breaking it down as small as possible, and then giving that sort of just immediate feedback as you go along would be effective. And also in that situation, you want to be careful about giving lots of negative feedback. You know, hurry up, that's not what I told you to do, get back on task, all those kinds of things, because in that situation, the child learns that I can get a whole lot of attention by not doing what I'm supposed to do. In fact, it's a whole lot easier to get this negative attention than it is to get the positive attention. And so that's when either ignoring or the kind of hand-over-hand physical guidance can come into play, where you're doing it in a very, very boring way and making sure the child knows that I only get all of this really rich attention when I'm doing what I'm supposed to do and I'm staying on task. Does that make sense?
Okay. I have a question here.
Sure.
How do we phase out the physical rewards? Like we're doing the potty training thing, and so he gets a treat, and we tried replacing the treat with a sticker, and now he just wants both. And how do we, I guess, phase out the positive things? Because we've been doing it now for almost 6 months, and he's not perfect yet, and you know he still has lots of accidents. But I guess how do we phase that out?
What does he get So for the audience at home, the question was about phasing out reinforcers. And so the specific question was the child is learning to potty train, and every time he is successful, is success defined as sitting on the toilet?
No, actually,
producing something in the toilet. Okay, he gets reward. So one of the there are lots of different ways to do that. You can make the reward smaller, and so if it was a piece of candy, he gets a marshmallow. Maybe he gets a smaller marshmallow. Or what you can also do is if he's interested in stickers, he has to get so many stickers before he gets the marshmallow. And so basically what you want to do is expect more behavior for less reward. So if you know that the marshmallow is effective, then you have to go twice to get that marshmallow. And you might get argument around it, and I wouldn't recommend engaging in the argument. Because, and I mean, it gets kind of sophisticated with what to do with the arguments, and if you get kind of pushback, defiance, we can talk more specifically about it. But it's a great question in terms of what to do with reinforcement. That you do, especially with tangible reinforcement, you want to back off and expect more for less. Sure.
Feeling more like with tantrum type situations, trying to get him ready for bed, wanting to put his pajamas on, or trying to wipe his nose or whatever, and sometimes it gets to be somewhat of a battle. So how would you deal with something like that when it's almost like an every night thing, just trying to get him ready for bed?
I might put that on the list of things to address by the end, because there are a couple of things I'm going to talk about between now and the end that could be really helpful with that. But I'm going to write it down and come back to it in case we don't. So that question had to do with sort of like regularly scheduled tantrums in the nightly routine. Okay, so in terms of making consequences effective, we talked about you want them immediate as possible. The next thing is you want them to be as consistent as possible. So as much as you can, having very clear rules and expectations in particular situations, having the same consequences for the same behaviors as much as possible, developing routines so kids know what is expected of them in particular situations, and as much as possible, following through on your commitments. I hear this all the time in the therapy room that, I said I was going to do X, Y, or Z, but I felt bad because I was working all day, because, it was really his sister's fault, because she made him mad, all those kinds of things. And so kids at this age think really, really concretely and will have a hard time understanding all of the nuances and all of the exceptions and all of the other things that are going through your head. Why did I get away with this today when I didn't get away with it yesterday? And so what that does is sets up kind of a flexible boundary. And when boundaries are flexible, then you have to test them to see what you can get away with and what you can't. And so you don't have to be drill sergeants, and you want to make sure kids understand that these consequences are coming, and they're just as likely to come from mom as they are from dad, as they will be someday from a classroom teacher, that kind of thing. And so when authority figure sets down a rule or an expectation, that rule or expectation is going to come with consequences. Either way, that if I meet those expectations, good things happen to me. If I don't meet those expectations, things I don't particularly care for happen to me. And then the last one, so we have immediate, consistent, and contingent. This is probably, the other ones are really obvious to a lot of folks and really clear in terms of a lot of the writing and the books and the parenting literature that's out there right now. Contingency is really, really critical and not something that I hear emphasized all that often. But basically, it's just cause and effect, that the child exhibits this behavior, then they get the consequence for that particular behavior. And you want to sort of separating out as much as possible when direct instruction happens and when consequences happen. So you can explain all day long how electricity works and how it's transmitted from a power plant to your house and how the outlets work, but you see a child sort of racing towards the outlet with a fork in their hand. It doesn't make any sense or any difference how electricity works, right? That's a situation for a consequence, not a situation for an explanation. That might be a situation where it's, this is dangerous, you need to go to timeout because you were fiddling with the outlet. And if you want to, spend your time explaining to a 3-year-old how electricity works, absolutely. Yes?
Just what if they ask why? Because, that's one of his phases is why right now, do you suggest to go along with it, or?
This is a really great question, and I want to make sure at home you're hearing this too. The question was, my child is asking why all the time. They're going to do that. And there are absolutely situations where you want to explain to your child about everything in the world. Why the sky is blue, why we wear seatbelts or be in car seats, any of those kinds of things. Why we don't stick forks in outlets. That is a time for direct instruction. If it is any time of the day where this question occurs to the child. If it's in a situation where you're giving a consequence, you need to go to timeout. Why? Don't stick the fork in the outlet. Why? Wait until you get compliance in the situation. Because a lot of the times kids learn really, really quickly why buys me time and why gets me all kinds of attention and conversation. And so absolutely explain to your child how the world works every opportunity you get, except if it's a situation where there's a particular behavior you're trying to manage. You have their entire lives to explain the why. And if it's, do you have an example of when you're getting asked why?
I don't think so.
I'm sure it happens all the time, that it's hard to
okay, let's go, we're gonna go bye-bye to go to daycare. Why? Well, because we have to go to work. Why? Because I need you to just get in the car.
Perfect. And that's what you end at is where I recommend you begin. Please put your shoes on. Please get in the car. Once we're in the car, you can explain your head off about why you have a job and why they go to daycare and how the world works. That in the moment, it doesn't make any bit of difference, right? Why they have to wear shoes or why they have to be in the car. It's tough because as parents, we have it in our heads that we want to impart this huge body of knowledge to our kids. That's not what they're after. In that moment. And as we talked about at the beginning, how behavior is functional, if I can get mom and dad off track by asking lots of questions, I'm going to do it. Especially in those kinds of situations where they're in a hurry, that they have other things on their mind. Why can be really, really powerful. And if you want to explain yourself, you absolutely can. But one of the things that I really, 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 really want to emphasize to parents is you never have to explain yourself. That you are the unquestioned, all-powerful authority figure in your child's life. And if you fall into the trap of explaining yourself now, it's going to be a nightmare. Especially when you actually have to rely on reason and logic with your teenagers. That if they sort of learn the power of challenging authority now, it's going to cause problems. I hope that answers the question with the whys. So with contingency, cause and effect, you want to separate instruction and consequences. So you can spend as much time as you like teaching about the world. That's the direct instruction part. When you're trying to encourage behaviors that you see or discourage behaviors that you see, that's the time for a consequence. And so I don't know if that's going to answer your question about how to match particular interventions to particular situations, but that kind of starts it, that if I see something I like, I give it the good stuff. And I see something I don't like or I want to discourage, I apply a consequence that the child's not going to like. The other important part of contingency is to understand that if you give the good stuff to begin with, you can't expect the good behavior afterwards. And so a lot of times I talk to parents, I spent the whole day at the zoo, I bought all kinds of ice cream and toys at the zoo, and we get home and the child's just a wreck and a mess and challenging me the whole time, and I just did all these wonderful things for the child. And the child, that kids don't make that kind of connection. That kids make the connection between I did X and mom did Y. I did A and dad did B. If I had a really exhausting day at the zoo where all kinds of wonderful things happened to me, I already got all these wonderful things that happened to me. I don't need to work hard for anything else. I mean, there are very few jobs out there that pay you before you do the work, right? I mean, how many of you would go to work if you got, or work as hard if you got paid on the front end and knew that money was already in the bank? That's not to say that you shouldn't do these nice and wonderful things for your kids. You just shouldn't necessarily expect them to, brush their teeth at night because you took them to the zoo earlier in the day. Or they, shouldn't make their bed in the morning because yesterday was their birthday and you got them all kinds of nice presents. So the order is very important in terms of consequences. So with that in mind, so contingent, immediate, and consistency and consequences. The other thing to keep in mind is this takes a lot of repetition. So what we're asking these little people to do is really hard, and in lots of ways it defies kind of biological imperatives, that they want high-fat, high-sugar foods, not broccoli. And so it's going to take some work to get them eating that broccoli. I keep coming back to this one, but biting a boy in class gets me the toy in his hand and lots of attention from the teachers. And so it's going to take a lot of work to to manage that kind of problem behavior. And this takes us all the way back to what we talked about at the beginning too, in terms of the matching law, that these behaviors occur at a rate at which, or the rate at which the behavior occurs is proportional to the rate at which they're reinforced, that it might take hundreds and hundreds of times practicing to get this behavior happening in a consistent kind of way. Once you start phasing out the candy, or for the marshmallows for going to the bathroom, it might take a lot more practice to get to that reward. But our ultimate goal is to go to the bathroom without the marshmallow, right? And so it's going to take some time working for that different consequence. So the last thing that I want to leave you with before I open it up, two last things I want to leave you with before we open it up to more general questions. Sometimes nothing is the best. Attention management, I can't emphasize this enough. I've looked through a lot of the parenting materials, like the 1-2-3 Magic and Love and Logic, and a lot of what's out there. And this tends to be really, really underemphasized, that sometimes just not giving any attention or any response to a behavior can be really, really, really effective. Nothing in your home is more fun, interesting, enjoyable, entertaining than you are. And to take that away from your child can be a really, really powerful intervention. So when to ignore? The easiest way to go is to think about it functionally. So what problem behaviors are driven by attention? And so when we're trying to match this to specific situations, things like interruptions, trying to get your attention when you're engaged or talking to someone else. I see lots of head nods. I'm sure that happens all the time, especially when you're on the phone, and especially when that phone call is particularly important. Whining, complaining, tantrums, crying, incessantly asking questions, getting lots of the whys. What I don't recommend ignoring is non-compliance. And so if you're saying, clean your room, pick up your toys, put your shoes on, and it doesn't happen, that's not something to ignore. That's something that needs kind of swift and immediate consequences to correct. Aggression, rule breaking, anything that's dangerous or risky, sort of charging at the outlet with a fork, that's not a time to ignore. Of course, ignoring and timeout, what I'm talking about here, ignoring and timeout are kind of based on the same principle. They're only really, really effective if there's time in. So lots of enjoyable time between you and your child. That's what you're taking away when you're ignoring. And so making sure that you're engaged and giving lots and lots of positive attention to the good stuff. And if you have a child with a lot of problem behaviors, or that feels like your child is whining and crying and screaming and not listening and biting and throwing things a whole lot more than other kids, trying to find those moments where they're sitting quietly with their hands in their lap and amplifying that. And so when you are starting to use some of these attention-based procedures, some of this ignoring of the timeout, it's a whole lot more effective. Did I see your hand flash?
Our son is going through a phase right now. He doesn't go to daycare or anything, but like, I'm a stay-at-home mom, and he's going into a hitting stage. And if I tell him no, he'll tell me no right back and hit me, or try to, yeah. And normally I just kind of grab his hand and just kind of, put him in timeout, although that doesn't quite work. He's 2, so he doesn't stay.
Definitely come out to the timeout parenting you. But the question had to do with a mom here in the crowd said that her child is going through a stage or a phase where he's hitting a whole lot more, and he'll hit mom, and then mom will correct it, but then the child will say no and kind of refuse to comply with the consequence. In that situation, he says no to you, and then what happens?
He'll try to hit me. That's what he tries to hit me after he says no.
Okay, and then what happens?
Either I grab his hand to stop him from hitting me, and then we go in timeout. I lead him right to the timeout, or I mean, that's pretty much it. I mean, I just sit with him and kind of hold him like hug him, hold him together and facing away from me. Okay. And then we just kind of sit in silence for a little while.
The silence is perfect, and you want to give as little attention to that no or that refusal as possible, and keep going with that kind of timeout. One of the other things that I would recommend in that situation is working really hard on direct instruction if it's necessary, to teach him nice touches and that kind of thing.
And we have done that. I would say I guess I have done, like, you shouldn't hit mom. You should hugging mom's okay, or
Or you don't tell mom and dad no. Yeah. Or don't tell mommy and daddy no. And he seems to get that.
Yeah. You want to be careful with that, because if you give a lot of airtime to the don'ts, you're going to see more of it. And so you did a great job. Well, and it's really hard to focus on the times where he keeps his hands to himself, because that's what he's supposed to do, right? But making sure you amplify that you did a great job today. Keeping, we had breakfast together and you kept your hands to yourself. Or I could tell you were really mad and you kept your hands to yourself. That was great. And so making sure you kind of differentiate it as much as possible. That all of this good stuff is happening when he keeps his hands to himself, and this really boring, immediate consequence is happening when he puts his hands on you. And making sure nobody in the house gets in an argument with the child about whether or not you hit mom. And nobody gets in an argument in the house about whether or not you hit dad. That these are the expectations, and we're not going to go through an ongoing dialogue justifying why you don't hit the authority figures in the house.
And when you say boring, you just mean ignoring, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just completely silenced?
What you described to me sounded great. That you hit mom, you have a timeout. That it doesn't have to be any more than that. And I'm sure his response won't be boring, but what you can give him back is absolutely nothing. And that absolutely nothing can be really, really powerful. One last slide, and then we'll need to move on to questions. Especially when kids are this age, parents take every opportunity they can to beat themselves up. That I'm doing something wrong, this has something, that, this is my fault. I get it all the time, that parents walk into my office and sit down and say, I know this was wrong, but I did this or that. As I said before, we're looking for trends in the child's behavior, not perfection. Just like in parenting, we're looking for trends, not perfection. So there'll be times where you blow your top, or there'll be times where you meant to ignore, but he just got you so mad you couldn't help yourself. Or you were asked why, and you explained why we wear a coat on a rainy day. That is definitely going to happen. And so you can't expect any more from yourself than you would from your child. In fact, most parents expect more from themselves, and that's why they end up beating themselves up. But this whole experience for a lot of parents, especially the ones who come to Parenting You, is new. Raising a child is a new kind of experience for you. Or raising a child with these kind of particular behavioral challenges might be new. And it takes a new set of tools for each child. Every kid is different. And I feel really sympathetic for parents who have 2 or 3 angels, and then the next child that comes along is not the same angel. And takes a little bit more in terms of the kinds of tools and the kind of techniques that will get the child where they need to be. That's not to say the child can't get there. It might take a little bit more work to turn that non-angel into an angel, but it is definitely possible. And you've got to take care of yourself in these situations. In every situation, the most important thing that you can do in parenting is taking care of yourself and taking care of your parenting partner. And so go out to dinner, go out, take dance lessons, go to yoga together, go on walks, even if it's just, a cup of coffee and playing cards after the kids go to bed. You have to have that rejuvenation time, because if it's all stress, there's no way to parent effectively. And spending time with friends, traveling, leaving the kids with other authority figures. A lot of parents are reluctant to do that, but it can be a really great opportunity for kids to learn that I have to follow rules with aunts and uncles and grandparents and that kind of thing. So I hope that makes sense. That taking care of yourself is just as important as putting as much energy into taking care of yourself is just as important as putting all the energy that you do into taking care of your child. Okay? So, with that said, that is the end of what I had to talk about today. I hope we talked a little bit about choosing battles and what to go after in terms of what to discipline and what not to discipline. Really, any behavior that you want to correct or encourage. That is a great time to bring discipline to bear. We talked a little bit what to do in specific situations. This was more of an overview and a foundational kind of thing to give you tools to apply as you see fit. And it's really hard to say what to do in particular situations because lots of different families have different expectations. That some families encourage lots of yelling, and that can be fine in terms of a family culture. In other family cultures, yelling is a really, really big problem that they want discouraged immediately and kind of extinguished. Balancing, reinforcing the positive and addressing the negative, it needs to happen simultaneously. That there needs to be lots of encouragement of the positive stuff, and if there's negative stuff going on, then there are ways to discourage that, and you want to do both. Worked in the past, but not now. How's it feel? Do you feel like you've got something to take home, or?
Consistency, I think, more
Okay.
and immediate, not letting, next time you kick me or you're going to your room type of thing.
Mm-hmm. And even as I hear you say that, going to your room can really be a mixed bag, because that can be fun and not in the least bit kind of punishing or discouraging. So it could have been effective in the past, but as kids are more independent and can kind of engage in self-play and with the toys that they have in their rooms, it can be really fun.
Okay, so what if you do make it boring as far as timeout goes? And I say, he does something bad, and I say, okay, let's go to timeout. And he looks at me and says, okay, walks to his timeout chair and sits in timeout chair. And, comes back down, and it happens again. It's almost like, okay, let's go to timeout. Yeehaw.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we're not doing anything to, make it fun for him. We take away his toy. We shut off the TV if it was on. We walk away from the area, go into a different room, but it doesn't seem to even faze him.
Does it discourage the behavior?
At that point in time, yes, but he'll go right back to it. And we still do the timeout. That's our main punishment, is the timeout situation, because we're really not wanting to do much of anything else, and we're not going to send him to his room because he likes to go to his room and play with the toys.
Right.
So I don't know what other discipline to use other than...
There are lots of variables you can play with the timeout. The time of the timeout, the duration of the timeout.
Yeah, we usually go by how old he is. He's 2 years old, so we normally do the 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we'll drag it out to 3 if, that's when we see that he might be getting a little bit more agitated with it, but,
Mm-hmm.
I mean.
So that might be something you want to play with, is the duration of timeout. Being very careful with the going into timeout and coming out of timeout, that you're in charge the whole time, that it's not determined by, like, I tend to recommend using a timer, but it's not, the timer doesn't let the child out of timeout, that you let the child out of timeout. And also when coming out of timeout, there's not any kind of reunion, no kind of special attention or time with parents when they come out of timeout. So the going in and coming out, the kind of location of timeout can also be another thing that you can kind of fiddle with, if there might be a place that could be even less reinforcing than the space that you use now.
Okay.
So a couple different things to play with. Yes?
I have a 22-month-old. We do timeouts, and we've always done timeouts. He does timeouts at daycare and with Grandma and Papa. Does great with them. At my house, it's a game. And I've done the sit in timeout, no thank you. That didn't work. So now I put him in timeout, and I turn my back to him, but he won't sit. It's like up, down, and he laughs about it. He's always consistently laughed about it with me. So how do I make it boring but still, because I know he's doing it for attention, because I still have to put him back in timeout. But how do I get him to sit there without giving him the attention?
There, in that situation, I'm sorry, I haven't been repeating these questions. So this question was from a mom with a 22-month-old who has kind of turned timeout into a game at her house, that she'll put him into timeout, he'll get out of timeout, and then it's just kind of back and forth, and it sounds like kind of chasing him around to get him to stay in the timeout space. And that's a really common problem, that kids learn that they can manipulate timeout into kind of a fun sort of game. And you're on the right track in terms of wanting to reduce the attention that you give as much as possible. You don't necessarily have to turn your back, that you can be facing the child, and every time you put him back in, you want to make sure you don't say a word.
I don't. I just, he runs, and I stop him as quickly as I can, and we sit down. I don't say anything, and I just sit him back down, and I'm waiting for him to sit, but he just looks at me and laughs, and then gets back up and starts running again.
How does that end?
I eventually have to give in because 5 minutes later we're still trying to sit on the rug that because I'm like, he's 2, so a 2-minute timeout is necessary, but 5 minutes later we're still fighting.
You've got a couple of options. One, you can change the location of timeout to one where you can manage him a little bit better, if that's going to be a corner or a step or something like that. Another thing you can do is, it sounds like he knows how to wear you down. And so another option is to make sure that he doesn't ever wear you down, that the timeout might take 45 minutes. And what he's got to learn is, I'm not getting out of this because mom's tired. I'm getting out of this because I sort of submitted to the intervention and I did what mom was expecting from me. I wish I had this data from a family I worked with in Baltimore, that mom started doing a really rigorous timeout, took 45 minutes of doing exactly what you're talking about, putting the child back in, putting the child back in, putting the child back in. But after, I want to say it was 2 or 3 days of 45-minute timeouts, they went down to 30 minutes. And then it was down to 15, and then 10, and then timeout became as kind of easy and lockstep as you're describing it, that the child learned the timeout procedure. And I'm not getting out of this because mom's tired. I'm not getting out because I wore mom down. I'm getting out because I stayed on the carpet, or I stayed in the corner, or that kind of thing. So changing the location to where you can control the space better, also persisting that you're going to put him back in until he stays there for the amount of time that you've decided timeout is. The other thing that you can do is very gently kind of hold your hands on his shoulders, or kind of hold him in a way that is very gentle but makes it difficult for him to move out of the space. And then you've got your timeout that way. That might result in more yelling and screaming and kicking and resistance, which can't wear you down either. That you've got to wait that out. Does that make sense? I wish there was an easy answer. But when kids learn that they have to learn kind of what I was talking about before with the clear and deliberate boundaries, that a child will only run into the wall so many times, where, okay, mom is rock solid and firm in this boundary, and that the only way I can get out of this is when she decides to open, not when I wear her down. Yes?
Well, I have a lot of issues, but I ain't gonna take up everybody's time. But I have a 3-year-old. She's the baby girl of total of 5 children altogether. First 3 were fine. These last 2, the 8 and the 3-year-old, are like out of control.
So you have the 3 angels I was talking about.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
But my most frustrating issue is, like, and you might address this when we go places, I literally don't like to take my kids to the store with me because she will dart under clothes. At church, she would run around the podium, up and down the pews, stepping on chairs. You know, I would take things to church to keep her occupied, but that only works for so long. But she loves going to children's church. Of course, I want her to hurry up and leave. So, I don't know, but she won't stay on the cart at a store. Okay. She wants to stand up, get it out.
I'm sure this sounds familiar. The question was what to do in public when kids aren't complying with those expectations. And taking her to church, taking her out shopping, that she won't stay in the cart, running under displays, those kinds of things. A couple of different things. Again, with the consequences, talking or with encouraging behavior, thinking about direct instruction and consequences. So being very, very explicit about, these are my expectations in public. I need you to stay within arm's distance of me. This is the voice I need you to use. These are, and not getting, we don't need, 25 things that you need to do in the store, but maybe whittling it down to 2 or 3 of the most important things. And then the other thing you can introduce is practicing. That we practice at home before we go out into public. And so it might seem silly, but we're going to pretend our house is the grocery store, or we're going to pretend our house is church, and we're going to sit on the couch together. And maybe you can even find a TV station that resembles what you would be doing at church. that we sit here and practice. And that way you can actually start with consequences for the behaviors in a situation with less social demand, that you don't have people looking at you at church, you don't have people looking at you in the grocery store. And you can begin to give consequences for those behaviors as you'd like to in public, but don't feel like you can because there are so many people around. So having those explicit expectations, this is the way we behave in church, this is the way we behave when we're out and about, and then practicing at home before you do it. And then when you're out in public, being able to give consequences, being able to do a timeout if you have to.
My kids, well, my one, he's 2, and he just screams Bloody Mary. I mean, I'll sit him in the cart and I'll say, you know, we don't run around in the store, and I'll sit him in the cart, and it's just, the whole store stops because my kids, you know, the alarms are going off. So, I mean, there's consequences, but I'm disturbing everybody else because of the consequences. It's really hard to discipline in the store. Is it a situation where I can wait till we get home and explain to him, or is he just going to forget that he ever did anything? I mean, how do I be effective and not make everybody go deaf?
So a mom here just talked about how her child will scream so loud at the store it sounds like an alarm is going off when he's put into the cart.
Yes, and there's a consequence when he's doing something. I actually give him a consequence. I'm disturbing. It's no matter where we go.
Where are you shopping? Uh-huh. I have never been to Shopko or to Walmart without hearing that sound. And so I'm sure you're not the only one, number one.
It's embarrassing, though. It's very embarrassing.
There's good news and there's bad news. The good news in that situation is that behavior can be managed and can go away. The bad news is what you have to teach the child is that tool, that screaming tool, doesn't work to get them what they want. And so he can use it all day long, and it's not going to have any effect. It's not going to reduce his consequence, and it's not going to get him what he wants.
So basically, I'm going to have to really irritate a lot of people for him to learn. Okay, I can do that.
And keep in mind that you're not the only one. And having the expectation when you go into the store that I have 2 goals today. I'm going to get my groceries, and I'm going to teach my 2-year-old how to behave in the Walmart. And he might scream his head off for, I don't know, it takes me about 90 minutes in the Walmart. So if he's going to scream his head off for 90 minutes. And that's going to be part of the shopping excursion today, is to learn this lesson. If you have the luxury of time, what you can also do is set up more specific interventions with doing practice runs at the Walmart. But I don't want to offer anything too crazy.
What is your suggestion on dealing with non-compliance, like in terms of when it's time to leave to go somewhere, not putting shoes on, you know, not getting a coat on, those kind of things where you don't have time to put your child in timeout or something?
So the question was what to do in a time crunch when you're faced with issues of compliance. So you're trying to get out the door for parenting you, and your child needs to put their shoes on, to put their coat on, to get something or other. The most power you have in a situation is before you give the command. And so you can decide, this isn't that big a deal, I can take care of it myself. They don't have to put their toys away before bed. I can put the toys away. I'll set this up even more. So it's 5 minutes before bedtime. There are toys all over the house. You can say to yourself, you know, it's so close to bedtime. I don't want a showdown about putting toys away. I'll put them away myself. I'll put them away when we get home from work and daycare tomorrow, when we've got more time, and I can make it into teaching him or her about compliance more so than, you know, we've got a time crunch, we got to get this done. In that situation, it sounds like the best thing to do is to put as little demand on the child as possible. And so you've got to get your shoes on, you've got to get your coat on, either doing it for your child, that you grab the shoes and you go put them on so they don't have to do it and it doesn't have to be about I told you to do something and you're not doing it, or you take them with you in the car. and they can do it in the car. And so basically not setting up a whole bunch of compliance tasks when you're trying to get out the door. Okay? I'm sorry. I'll start in the front and work my way back.
All right, a couple things. One, on the store deal, if he's screaming and stuff the whole time in the store, and you try to redirect and give him something to hold on to, hey, can you hold on to this? Give him something out of the car. Give him a task. Are you rewarding bad behavior by redirecting him with that?
Not necessarily. As long as you're not responding to the yelling.
And then what about overreacting when it comes to discipline? Because even the simplest no, when it's like something petty, like he's like gonna break something, a real simple no versus a timeout, you get the exact same reaction: total freak out, flopping on the ground, screaming. I mean, I know he's only 2.5, but I guess I'm kind of lost as are we doing timeouts wrong, or like?
It sounds like, if anything, you're probably doing timeouts right. if it's generating such a profound response, and also that the no is so powerful that daughter, he knows that the no means no. And kids will try all kinds of different behaviors. Like right now, boundaries are tested by, being defiant and hitting mom and saying no when he hits you, or throwing these knockdown, drag out tantrums, or maybe I can get parents to back down when we're out in public. This is how kids are testing boundaries now. And not too far down the line, it's going to be, how far can I push curfew? Or what do I have to say in order to get access to the car? It sounds like what you're describing are pretty normal, developmentally appropriate tantrums. That it sounds like knock down, drag out, fall on the floor, and it feels to us like kind of a disproportionate emotional response. But what they're also learning by you sticking to your guns is distress tolerance. That I cannot get what I want, and it's not the end of the world. And I can yell and scream and have all these really powerful emotions, and at the end of the day, I still have somebody tucking me in at night. And so it sounds like keep doing what you're doing, that the timeout, again, it takes a lot of practice, that he's going to have to hear no a whole bunch of times before that kind of strong reaction decreases in some kind of way. And it might be an opportunity every time if there are any times where you can say no, he's like, yeah, okay. Then making sure that you really, really give that a lot of attention. He did such a good job saying or hearing no that he's getting popsicles or, I don't know, whatever he likes. Yes.
My question is, you talked about, consistency and, cause and effect. You do this and this is the result of that. How do you manage that with grandma and when you're on vacation and when you have all these adult helpers that kind of interfering with how like your parenting style, or it's okay and you're telling them no chocolate and they're sliding chocolate around behind you or whatever, to make sure that they're still getting that consistency and they don't get to break the rules just because we're not at home?
So the question was, how do I manage being undermined by my family? So how being on vacation with family members or grandparents, spoiling kids, that kind of thing, and kind of loosening, being consistent when there are other authority figures or caregivers involved. That's a really tough one. And kids are really smart, and so they can learn who they can play and who they can't play. And when it boils down to it, as long as they know they can't play you and they can't play dad at home, that's really the most important thing. Although the situation I'm sure that you run into is that when you're out and about with particular caregivers who sort of dampen your consequences, that your authority gets challenged more and you see more of the problem behavior. Really having a conversation with the other caregivers and talking to them about how important it is that they maintain the things that you're trying to maintain. One of the things that I really emphasize with families is that we're doing this, we're all parenting in one way or another. And we do this because we love the child so much. And there are lots of ways to show love for the child. And what the child needs right now more than anything is to learn not to scream and cry, not to pester about this or that. And so we need to get on the same team in terms of how we're showing love.
Okay, last question. We have another meeting.
My question is, how do you correct or discourage interruptions when you're talking to grandma and she wants to talk to you and she wants to talk to grandma and interrupting the conversation that you're trying to have?
The question was about interruption. Ignoring is the best way to go. It kind of depends if it's live or on the phone. If it's on the phone, you can always put space in between you and the child, and so they can learn that they can't interrupt you, that you're going to have that conversation with grandma regardless of how much they're begging to get on the phone or pulling at your clothes, that kind of thing. Sometimes, if it becomes a really, really bad problem, I'll recommend to parents having fake conversations on their cell phones, like they pretend like they're talking to someone and no one's really there, and so you don't have to deal with kind of the social consequences of the interruption all the time, but you give the child the chance to learn that when mom's on the phone, I'm not getting attention no matter what. And so you have the dead phone in your hand and you're just kind of holding it there and talking to yourself, or even calling grandma and saying that, you know, we're working on interruptions right now and this is just, I'm waiting for the interruption to come so I can ignore it. So I can take one more quick one when they stepped out. Yes.
One of the things that she gets timeouts for most from us is us saying, "You're not listening to mommy and daddy." Is that too broad? Should we try to narrow it down? Because I don't know.
How old?
2.
That is fine. One intermediate intervention you could think about is doing kind of a hand-over-hand compliance technique where, you know, pick up your shoes. That, no, I'm not doing that. You walk her over and then move her to take the shoes wherever you want her to take them. If she resists that, then she could go to timeout, but that might be one step in between. But no, I mean, when it comes down to it, you're not following directions, you have timeout is perfectly reasonable. Okay, well, thank you all for coming out tonight.